Good morning, dear colleagues. New week, new session of our Boni. Today, I'm very much looking forward to introduce Katerina Polychronopoulos for the second time in this series. Katerina is member of the staff of our department. Her background is law, therefore, obviously, and her national background is the US. She has been joining us now for several months or years already with her very interesting and very insightful US perspective on many things that we do, including this series here and our Boni. Katerina, thank you for being here again. Last time when we met, it's a year ago, roughly speaking. The world looked very different in the US, also from a political point of view, but also from a pandemic point of view. So perhaps I may ask you to start with simply giving us an overview about how exactly the pandemic looks like at the moment. At the moment means in May 2021 in the US, and how the political assessment of the situation looks like at the moment. Please.
Absolutely. Thank you for the warm welcome. In the US, cases are shrinking generally across the board. There are a few exceptions. For example, in New Jersey, Montana, Wyoming, Arizona, there still are cases increasing. But in the first Ars Boni, we discussed that the US is a federal system, and that generally each state can dictate its own lockdown rules. So we're still seeing a variety of different reactions in the United States and a variety of different rules. So many states are slowly lifting restrictions. Mm-hmm. For example, California has instituted this color-coded system, which is county by county. And so restrictions are being lifted based on how risky each county is deemed to be. In mid-June, a lot of California businesses will reopen, and schools are going to be in the fall, hopefully all back to normal in California. In New York, which is the other kind of big state that many people are interested in, we have, again, a lifting of restrictions by mid-May. So within a week or so, New York is planning to increase occupancy limits for museums and movie theaters and a lot of even indoor public spaces. It's increased capacity from 100 individuals indoors. I'm sorry, from in the tens of individuals indoors to about 100 individuals being permitted indoors. Mm-hmm. And capacity for outdoor venues is at 200 or so. So overall, across the board, the US is lifting restrictions. Of course, it varies from state to state, but things are looking much better. And that is due to, I guess I'm anticipating your follow-up question, but how well the US is doing in terms of vaccinating their population.
Mm-hmm. So there is in the political assessment, at least, there is a clear relation between the amount of people being vaccinated and the amount of people no longer being infected. So this is not really challenged.
Yeah, no, I would say no, not really. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's science, right? So
yeah, but in Europe, there are quite some people who talk about the weather, or I don't know, people behave better than a year ago or whatever. I mean, there could be, seriously, there could be additional reasons, not just the vaccination, but
yeah, of course, sure. Yeah, and I as we spoke last year, many people even resisted the science. Yes, it's clearly a connection to how many people are being vaccinated. At least, that's what each state legislature is sort of pointing to as the reason that they're lifting restrictions. Yeah.
And how is the US progressing with vaccinations? I mean, in international figures, they are doing quite well, aren't they?
Quite well, yes. Mm. So about, I guess, over 34% of the population is already fully vaccinated. Mm. Close to 50%, something like 47% or so have received one dose already. Mm-hmm. And that represents over 255 million vaccines having been administered already. Mm-hmm. To put that in perspective, Austria, I think the last figure that I saw was that 15% had at least received one dose. Mm-hmm. Of course, that's a little bit dated, so I think it's likely a higher number. But the US is doing quite well in acquiring and vaccinating people very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And why is this? Why does it work better there than here?
Good question. So there's an Atlantic article that I was reviewing briefly, and I don't know the details, but it looks like the US entered into this public-private partnership and acquired vaccines, basically spent money very quickly early on, and didn't have any. It was a sort of US is, going to focus on getting vaccines as quickly as possible, whereas the European Commission decided to negotiate for vaccines as a bloc, as opposed to letting each country fend for itself. And I think that this contributed to essentially Europe not getting vaccines quite as quickly as the US did.
And is the vaccination campaign organized on a state-by-state basis, or is it a federal organization taking care of it?
Yeah, right now it's federal organization taking care of it. Yeah.
And the different states don't challenge this, so that's widely accepted, because this is also a difference here in Austria, at least, and also in Germany, right? That it's mainly organized on a state level, and the states, as you know, in Austria are sometimes ridiculously small, right?
Yeah.
Still, they are organizing everything on their own. Yeah, that's different in the US.
It's different in the US. Yeah. Traditionally, the federal government takes care of things like this. They obviously have more negotiating power, yeah, and they have more spending power. That's really the bottom line. Is this the spending power of the U.S. government as a whole, and so of the federal government.
Yeah.
And this is why it proceeded this way, and is not challenged.
Okay, I see. Are there any serious political movements or people organizing themselves who do not agree in the vaccination campaign, or who are arguing that, all these political movements that we have here in Europe, arguing that this is illegal, or that it's an infringement of ethical standards, or that it's dangerous and all this? Is this a significant force in the political debate, or is it different from Europe here?
Do you mean that compulsory vaccination is sort of an infringement of individual rights, that kind of an argument?
Yeah, but it's not. I mean, compulsory. I don't think that it's compulsory in the US, is it? You don't need to.
Not yet.
No, not yet. Are they thinking about making it compulsory? Is there
they could
debate on this?
They could. Not that I know of currently, but the US has done things like this in the past, right? An example would be the smallpox vaccination. And this is why we got actually a lot of sort of Supreme Court case law that was handed down because of this compulsory smallpox vaccination. So this has been done in the past.
Yeah, no, but what we have in Europe is parties arguing that although it's not compulsory, there is some kind of factual obligation to be vaccinated, because only if you are vaccinated, you are allowed to leave the house, or you're allowed to go to university and all this. And that this, I mean, according to the argument of some of those parties, might infringe fundamental rights. I
see.
And that's not a debate that you see in the US, do you?
Currently, no. I haven't come across any information like that there has been, no. So I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the federal government at least hasn't issued specific restrictions on individuals based on whether they're vaccinated or not. So that's, again, something that, as we talked about in the first time, is a police power that's vested in the states themselves. And so it would be up to the states to determine whether individuals who are vaccinated have additional rights or freedoms as compared to those who are not. And we haven't had any, at least not that I'm aware of, any kind of official statement about what vaccinated people can and cannot do versus those who have not been vaccinated. So there hasn't been specific pushback because of that.
I see. So this also means then that you don't have a debate like we have it in Europe at the moment on digital green certificates, as we call them. So some kind of QR code or whatever it might be, showing that one is either vaccinated or had an infection or is tested and might therefore profit from given privileges. That's not happening then either on a federal level, correct?
No, not yet, not yet. The CDC has issued guidelines which say, what vaccinated people should or should not be capable of doing. So, or what, not capable, but what they should or should not do as a matter of protecting the others around them and themselves, primarily others around them. So, for example, the CDC says vaccinated people are fine to meet with others in indoor spaces that are vaccinated. Probably okay to meet with individuals who are not high risk. Should not meet with individuals that are at high risk indoors. So guidelines like these, but they're not regulations, right? They're recommendations.
So they are not hard law in the sense that you break the law if you don't follow them.
That's
interesting. Katerina, were there cases under judicial review since we met last time? Anything that is worth to be reported about the constitutional or fundamental rights aspects of the pandemic in the US?
Yeah. Yeah, the US is has a reputation of having a litigious population somewhat. So
like Germany and even Austria, I would say, right? So not so much of a difference.
There are several interesting cases. So the lockdown rules have been challenged in many different states, as we discussed. Of course, lockdown rules vary from state to state. So of course, cases varied from state to state as well. And lockdown rules were challenged on a variety of bases. Some of the most interesting ones were the constitutional right to freedom of religion and freedom of association. Generally, courts across the board, there are a few exceptions. Wisconsin's one of them. Generally, across the board, courts sided with governors and state legislatures that during a pandemic, it's widely permissible for a governor or a state legislature to restrict certain freedoms for the health of the public. So not a whole lot of controversy there. But there were conservation groups, for example, that challenged a ban on motorboat use. In Ohio, a bridal shop sued over its designation as a non-essential business. In Virginia, I think it was 15 suits that the Attorney General had to defend there. For example, in one of them, a fitness studio chain claimed that the governor overstepped authority by shutting down private health clubs. So there were several of these sort of suits. Some of the suits claimed that lockdown measures were vaguely drafted, that they were overbroad, that they were unreasonable or unfair. Generally, all of these have to prove that there was no rational basis for the legislature to come up with these lockdown rules. And that's just such a high bar that virtually none of them were successful.
So there won't be any case that will make it into legal history from the pandemic from a US perspective, at least until now.
Yeah, no, at least so far, none that I know of. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Good. Last set of questions, if I may, Katerina, about the situation at law schools and universities as a whole. How does that look like at the moment?
Yeah, that's been very challenging. So I'm going to take kind of two separate questions. One of them is the bar exam and one of them is law schools. Or I don't know if you actually asked about the bar exam law practices.
Sometimes I do. I mean, but
okay. Sure.
Of course, relevant, obviously. So please go ahead.
Yeah. So for law schools in the US, traditionally, the way it's a kind of grueling system. The way that you're assessed is that 100% of your final grade is based on the final exam. So obviously, a lot is riding on this final exam. And law schools have responded in a variety of ways. Many top law schools have changed to a pass-fail system during lockdown. So I think among them is Harvard, Cornell, Stanford. So a lot of big names there. That can represent a lot of challenges, of course, because it's more difficult to assess students based on pass-fail system. And for students who would have kind of improved their performance over the course of their law school career, this can represent a disadvantage, but this is what some law schools have done. Final exams have largely been now moved to an online platform. There are a few software, a few different pieces of software that law schools are using to proctor exams. Many of them will record your keystrokes, so that helps with cheating. or discourages it, hopefully. There haven't been widespread reports of cheating as far as I have heard or read. And then many exams are now either take home, so 48 hours, you can complete an exam in 48 hours, or you can select any 3-hour window, or however long the exam over the course of a day or over the course of a week, sort of to take your exam so you can self-schedule. That's a big difference. So that's how exams have been proceeding.
Yeah. Two questions to this, Katerina, if I may. First question, is there any debate on whether this is legal, that students are so closely monitored? I mean, the privacy implications and the data protection implications of this. And second, is there any challenge of whether it's appropriate to assess law students by asking them to write an essay in 48 hours instead of, solving a case or something, or in 2 instead of this? Or is everyone accepting that this is the new way to do it?
Instead of solving a case, you mean?
I mean, no, I need to be more precise on this. I mean, this is a very, very intense debate in the countries that I'm aware of here in Europe, that, I mean, the traditional way of assessing law students is that you give them a case and you ask them solve the case within a given rather short time frame, 4 or 5 hours, without any additional tools apart from the law. That's the typical way to how people are assessed in Europe. And this is obviously not working if you do it's not working the same way when you ask students to do this at home without closely monitoring what they are doing. This is one of the issues that we have at the moment. And therefore, there's plenty of debate now whether we should reorganize the way we organize exams, in the sense that this is no longer useful, or whether we should go more into the direction that we closely monitor what they are doing, taking into account that this might be a problem from a data protection or privacy point of view. And therefore, I would like to know whether those 2 debates, one of them, how to properly monitor students, second, how to organize the exams in the way that the cheating problem does not occur so frequently and so prominently, how these 2 questions are assessed. Or whether the debate is completely different because the tradition of examining students is so different.
Yeah, I guess I would say probably the latter, that the debate is a little bit different. I think it has sparked a lot of questions about what we're testing on exams, and that's particularly true in the case of the bar exam. For law schools, I would say that there hasn't been so much of a concern over data protection, because I believe that the information that's really being collected or monitored is not highly sensitive. What you see for the bar exam, which is being monitored by a proctoring software called ExamSoft, that does require for entrance the collection of some biometric information. So, for example, in California, you have an iris scan before you sit for the bar exam, or a facial scan, facial recognition scan. And then you keep your camera on the entire time throughout the exam. And this has sparked a lot of debates about the privacy of information, especially because in Michigan, I think last year, there was a breach of personal information of bar exam test participants. So this has obviously been a debate about, well, should we be trusting this software with so much sensitive information? What happens when there is a breach, and who should be liable? In Texas, they had all of the bar exam participants stay in a hotel room, and then there would be a proctor that would go from room to room and check up on them. So there are a variety of different responses in terms of how the bar exam is conducted, but there hasn't been a very satisfactory alternative, right? There are other problems also with this ExamSoft biometric information, which is that, for example, people with darker skin, it doesn't do as good of a job at, I guess, consistently recognizing them throughout the exam. And so what a lot of times they have to do is shine a light on their face, which clearly disadvantages them. Yeah. So there's an article, and I think it was, I can try and find it again. But I think it was, I'll find it so you can link it below, that discusses this VentureBeat, I think, is the one who published it, that discusses this disadvantage, which is obviously a huge deal when it's a make it or break it exam. It can mean the loss of a job for a lot of law students. So that's being pretty widely debated. But back to law students, based on the U.S. testing system is largely based on an honor code. And again, I haven't heard widespread reports about cheating. So I don't know that there's too much of a debate about that. What there is a debate about is, what are we really testing? Does it give you any information about how good of a lawyer somebody is going to be, whether they can solve something without any kind of use of external materials? Because that's not what law practice looks like, right? You have, yes, of course, you have to have some sort of general idea about the law and what it says, and where to find the answer, right? But generally, you have access to a wide variety of both electronic and paper resources as a lawyer, when you're going to solve a case, as you say. And that's not what is necessarily being tested on the bar exam or during law school exams. So.
I see, but that's probably a rather fundamental debate, which is now perhaps a little bit more important because of the pandemic, but it's not really connected with the pandemic in the sense that you can't think about the one without the other, right?
Yeah, no, it's not really connected with the pandemic. It sparked this debate because of the fact that so many more exams are being given as exams, and so you just have a different format. Professors will say, well, this is how it would be done in practice with access to all this information. Why not do it like this on the actual exam day?
I see. And when it comes to teaching, Katerina, I mean, teaching is mainly organized online still, or are people going back to campus? And perhaps the second question coming with this, in my perception, at least, I see many of the UK and also the US-based universities now actively entering new markets, which is online education in law for people who are not able or not willing to physically move to the US or to the UK. So there are plenty of new programs that I see offering quite costly options for non-US students to study in the US. Do you see the same tendency? And if so, is there any debate or any feeling about that in the leading law schools that you might report?
Sure. So generally, yes, education has remained online. And I believe some schools are still considering doing online next semester, but largely the US is going to reopen, so in-person classes in the fall. That's the general trend. As far as getting into new markets, I am not aware of. I actually have not candidly looked at statistics or articles about this, but I have generally heard that yes, higher education institutions have started to take advantage of what international sources of attendance as well. But I'm not aware of any kind of increased trends in that direction, at least not for law schools.
I see. Okay, so it's more or less going back to normal probably in autumn. Okay,
hopefully.
I see. Hopefully, okay. Thank you, Katerina. Anything else that you would like to recommend to our listeners? Any material that you're specifically interested in and that we should share? Anything else that you would still like to report?
No, there are several links that I think we're going to provide, some about how, vaccination trends, some information about lawsuits that have been in response to lockdown measures and other CDC recommendations.
I see. Okay, so then this was short but very interesting. I thank you so much, Katerina. Thank you to you. Thank you to our listeners for being with us. Stay interested, stay connected with us, and in particular, stay as healthy as possible or become as healthy as possible as quickly as possible. All the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you.